Are you a software developer or engineer? Do you want to provide feedback on products created for developers? User Interviews is looking for quality participants to sign up for user studies. This is a great opportunity to help shape the future of software development. Your feedback will help developers create better products that meet your needs. You also get to earn money while doing so. So, what are you waiting for? Sign up today and help make a difference in the software development community. Head on to zen.ai forward slash the dev life. That is zen.ai forward slash THEDEVLIFE to get started. If you're signing up directly on the website at userinterviews.com, remember to use the coupon code THISDevLife. That is THISDEVLIFE. The links will also be provided in the show notes. It's yet another wonderful episode of This Dev Life, and I have another amazing guest joining on the show today. He's someone I've known for about 10 years. So when you listen to him, you want to grab a jotter because he has a lot of wisdom to dispense tonight. We record in the night. I've known him since university days. He's been a super amazing guy, and he carries an nose through a lot of the values I admire as a Christian, as a developer, as a community person, a family person. So he's someone I actually respect, although he calls me a gun, but he's someone I respect so much. So everyone meet Ayomide, who currently is a senior software engineer at community.com. But it's not just that. Of course, I don't want to steal your thunder. So tell us, Ayomide, who are you?
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's actually an honor for me to be here, and I'm definitely not going to stop calling you Ego, right? I have like huge respect for you for everything you represent and stuff. So yeah, like Dara said, I'm Ayomide Aregbede. I've been a software engineer for almost a decade now, and there's an interesting story around how I started software engineering. The interesting story is that I actually dropped out from the university but I don't know if I should spill the bean now or if I should just punch
Don't
that.
spill it quiet. I have a
Okay,
question on
so okay, yeah,
that.
so I'm just gonna push that for later. So, but I've been building software systems for like the past 8 years. Within that period, I've also spent most of my time helping people discover their career paths into tech. And I recently started also helping people already in tech, software engineers, designers, and stuff, figuring out how to build real careers. So I've noticed that, especially from this side of the world in Nigeria and in Africa, most of our experience are mostly around contracting, freelancing, and stuff. And so, whenever most of us switch into working with product companies, working in companies where we have to stay for like 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years, we struggle with that transition. So, we struggle with internal visibility, we struggle with like promotions, we struggle with like negotiations and stuff like that. And so, two of the things I do is help people who are outside the space figure out a path into the space. And by help, I mean provide mentorship. Sometimes I actually go as far as providing like monthly stipends to them for like a couple of months, providing them with like resources. Most of this from my personal budgets, but I have friends within my community who also oftentimes contribute to achieving this. And on the other hand, I help people already in tech who are like still at the early stage of their career figure out how to do proper negotiations and also figure out how to like transition from just being junior engineer, mid-level engineers and stuff to becoming senior engineers or people who have more vibrant and impactful roles in their startups and organizations.
That's quite a lot for an intro. Thanks very much for that. So, just a summary: is a developer for almost 10 years, building systems, mentoring people to get started in tech, and also staying in tech and getting visibility in their companies because the nature of people who generally come from the areas we come from are people who are into gigs, freelancing, and stuff. So, helping them stay in their career and growing in that field to become more senior as time goes by, and he also does a bit of charity inside it also, using his own money to sponsor people even when there is nothing in it for him, which is something I admire quite a lot. Thanks very much for that. Now, uh, most of the things we'll talk about, you've mentioned in the intro, will just be delving more into them one by one. The first one is actually talking about that uh, journey of how you started into software development. How did you start coding? Where did you learn it? How did you learn it? What was it like learning how to code?
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to try and be very expansive and figure out where to be brief on this. So in when I was in food, I was doing physics electronics, and so when I left secondary school, I was in some I was in like a ICT group, and so in secondary school we learned about fixing hardwares and stuff. And so we had like just this one PC at home, and so that was like in SS3. I got like fascinated with fixing hardwares, and I experimented with it. But by the time I got to FUTA, I was doing physical electronics. Weird story. I kind of, because I think at the time, because I made FUTA like my second choice, even if I was like top, I was top on the list for computer science. I couldn't get into computer science department and stuff, so I had to go into like physics electronics. And so I didn't have like electronics background, and so that affected me when I was in physics. So, but one day I was in the lab and I saw a guy who was writing stuff on his system, and so he was writing some stuff. And I'm saying this because right now I know it's code, but at the time I just saw him writing some stuff, and
Stuff.
then he would go somewhere, refresh the page, and stuff would change, and he would write stuff, refresh the page, and stuff would change. And so I just stayed with him. So he was a 500 level student at that time, and so I just stayed with him. I was just fascinated. I was just with him throughout. And it was like he just called me out. He found that I'm fascinated about what he's doing. And it was like if I had like a laptop or so, he would be able to provide me with PDFs and stuff. But I just forgot about it. Went back to school, went back to like the grind, results and the like. So but in 200 level, 300 level, my friend wanted to build a website. He wanted to build his own Gossip Girl or Nairaland version for Footer. And we went to meet someone, and the guy at the time charged us about 80K. And so this is like 2012, 2013, where allowance at that moment was not even more than like 2K, 3K per month and stuff. And you're saying 80K to build a website and 20K or 15K every month to maintain it.
To
And
maintain.
my guy was like, "Ah, man, no, we can't do this, right?" And so I was like, tell me just to build it. I can learn it. And so I went back to meet that guy I'd seen like 2 years earlier. He was in school then for his clearance and stuff. And so I met him and I spoke to him and he gave me like PDFs and stuff. But the problem was that I didn't have a laptop. So I had to go home, went home for holidays. My dad had one laptop that he wasn't using. So I just took the laptop. The laptop then had like Windows Vista on it. So I just took the
That
laptop.
was.
Yeah, so I took the laptop then. It was an Intel, was it Pentium or Celeron or so? So I took the laptop to school, and so I started learning, right? I dabbled around a lot. The resources I had were like on PHP, JavaScript, and HTML. At some point, I dabbled into C Sharp, I dabbled into Java. And I was just in this phase where the bulk of my time in the university was spent either playing table tennis for footer or learning how to write code and then just submitting assignments and just submitting stuff to
Doing
school
the
just to ensure I
tests.
passed in school and all. And so eventually I was like, man, I'm more interested in writing code. And I'm a very optimistic person. I've become way more realistic now with responsibilities, with marriage and stuff. But like I was very optimistic then. And I was like, I can learn how to write code and I can build stuff, right? I can build a business, I can build an OS. Like the sky is the limit. But I'm staying in school, stressing myself. So I left school and started to just focus on writing code and stuff. And so that's how like I started writing code.
That's quite an interesting story from getting annoyed with an 80K bill. I know then 80,000 naira was quite a lot of money. I think that was probably the total amount you paid for school fees during the 5 years time. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Yeah. So it was crazy.
yeah, so it was quite a lot. It's enough to get someone annoyed to learn how to code. That's quite an interesting story. And so you so by the time you decided to drop out of uni, what language were you focusing on by then?
So by the time I decided to drop out from uni, I think I was barely good at even web. So that's even the interesting story, right? Whenever people talk to me about like dropping out, people always assume that I was earning income, I was already good, and so like the future looked bright, and so that was like a motivation to leave school. But weirdly, at the time when I left, I was just getting like my introduction into like HTML, CSS. I'd built like maybe a few websites for small organizations around footer and stuff. And you can imagine the amount of money then, maybe
Yeah,
like 5K
15K,
here, 1K
10K.
here, all this kind of stuff, right? So that was like the core thing I knew then. So it was like HTML, CSS, and PHP, dabbling into Java then to just learn about algorithms and data structures and stuff. But that was all. Like still very, I would say that a person who has graduated, who has done like a couple of Udemy courses, or who has done like an Udacity course on React most likely knew more than what I knew when I dropped out from school.
Uh, that was quite a risk you took there. Uh, so now, just for context for our listeners, when you're talking about thousand and K, say we mean in naira, Nigerian naira, not in US dollars. Okay, let's just be
Oh
so
yeah.
clear about that. It's not thousands of dollars; it's thousands of naira. And don't try to do the exchange rate conversion right now, because you're gonna cry. now, um, now, when you left school, of course, you would have built some networks of businesses and referrals, etc. But what was the experience starting? What was the experience like starting off after you left school and you were learning to code? I wouldn't exactly say on your own because, of course, there'll be materials and stuff. How was it like staying in that field, knowing the risk you were taking without a degree, as at the time you started?
Okay, so in retrospect, right, there was like some level of naivety that made it possible for me to make that decision at the time. And interestingly, I didn't have like a business network. So it's really hard for me to tell the story for people to believe me because people's frame of mind around this kind of things are usually that. So when I was going into school, I already had like a very weird perspective going into the university. I wanted to graduate with like a first class or a 2-1 to go do theoretical physics in the US and stuff. So I've always been that kind of like extremely optimistic person, very ambitious in terms of like learning and stuff, not necessarily around money and all. So I've really not been an ambitious person when it comes to like money, but more ambitious around like acquiring knowledge and exploring knowledge and stuff. And so at the time when I left school, I'd built for like 2 or 3 businesses in school. I was really struggling, and this is a story that I try not to share because I'm not really a fan of the whole grass to grain story or the whole motivational or inspirational side of things.
Mhm.
I feel people should just do stuff, but I'm going to take time to share it here. So when I left school, it was really difficult for my parents to accept it. But I had a friend then who was more like a spiritual mentor to me. And so he said I should come to Lagos. I was in Akure for a while. So he said I should come to Lagos and stay with my parents. And so that my parents have a sense of the fact that I'm not being irresponsible and stuff because like I was learning and the like. So, but I came to Lagos, went back to Akure. I had a guy in Ife that was building a company. He was building websites for Nigerian hosting companies. So at that time, a lot of people who were hosting websites on Nigerian hosting companies were like small business owners who could not design. And so they
Yeah.
would send it to the guy, but the guy was mostly a designer. And so he would push it to me to build like the HTML and CSS and stuff like that because I had that knowledge. And so I was working with him then. So he was like he provided accommodation, income, and also the first time I had access to fast internet network for like 3 months or so because the network in the University of Ibadan, sorry, OAU, then Obafemi
Oh,
Awolowo
yeah.
University was crazy. That was like the fastest. I like it was incredible and amazing for me. I went to the cyber cafe that day and people were streaming. So like I was downloading videos because I was coming from a place of starvation, and people were streaming YouTube videos, and it was weird to me. Like,
Like,
why
we
are
should
you
be downloading
streaming?
this, guys.
Right? And I was streaming videos in the gigs and stuff. I literally had to beg the guy to give me an extension on salary so I could get an hard disk to download as much videos I could download into the hard disk because I was not sure of the next time I would experience that level of internet and stuff. So I went back to Lagos. And so when I was in Lagos, a friend of mine who had just come back from IT, actually, no, I came back to Accra from Ife. So a friend of mine who had just come back from IT in Abuja, a friend of a friend reached out to me and he met me. Then I was still working at like the table tennis hall. So I dropped out, right? But it was not really very official. You know, there's no like going to school to write, I've dropped out. You just
Yeah.
drop out and just linger. So I was still like the table tennis captain in foot. I was still training people. So I had access to the hall. So he came to the hall and said, hey, he heard I dropped out from school. He feels my vibe, he respects me and stuff, but he feels that I need to get exposed to how people are actually building software outside Akure and even potentially outside Lagos and stuff. And so he connected me to a Slack group where I met the person who literally mentored me for the first 2, 3 years of my career and is arguably from a technical and computer science perspective the reason why I think my career has taken the path it has taken, right? I've had mentors in different areas. I had a mentor when I dropped out from school, was like a spiritual mentor who kept me in check, who taught me how to have conversations with my parents, how to do things the way I did things and stuff. But this was like my mentor who showed me the possibilities in software engineering. So I joined the group on Slack, went back home. So the guy who connected me told me that I need to go back to Lagos. I need to leave Accra. I need to leave this whole local champion environment where people feel I'm a badass and stuff like that, and just go to Lagos and go meet guys who are actually like doing stuff and all. And unfortunately, he didn't know that my area in Lagos is way far from Lagos. But I still went back. I still went back home, right? So I grew up in Badagry area. So I went back home. I was with my parents, and so this guy who he connected me with on Slack was in the US. And so one day we were just having like a casual conversation, and he mentioned how much he was earning. He mentioned at the time that he was earning $8,000 a month. And so ding 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 ding, my mind was like, what? You're earning $8,000 a month?
In a month, not a year.
Like month, like, right? And so I told myself then that if I was earning just $500 a month, I would be able to show my parents that
You
like
made the
that
right
I am
choice.
responsible and I can take care of myself. So like he was 8K and I was just interested in just $500. Like $500 at the time, based on like my social and economic status, based on even people who had jobs around me then, was like a whole lot of money. And so it
Mhm.
helped me because I was laser focused. So like my mind was, I'm going to do everything I can do to get myself to my first $500 a month. And so he was in the US, and so there was like time zone differences and stuff. And so I spent like most of my time with him overnight. So I'd start like working with him from like 5 o'clock in the evening till like the
Yeah.
next morning by 2. He would even stay up to like 10 o'clock his own time, so which would mean I would stay till 6. By the time my spiritual mentor was like, I also had to ensure that I did all the chores at home so that my parents would not just feel that I was just staying and being useless and stuff. And so I would still have to wake up in the morning and do chores. So I noticed that my parents kind of noticed that I was responsible. And so it's reduced the whole go back to school, and the conversation now deferred to, okay, defer your admission, right? Defer your admission, figure out if there is a way for you to tell Futa that, hey, I'm stopping now, but I'm going to come back in like a couple of years and stuff like that. But at the time I got a job in Lagos for, at that time it was like for like 70,000
Per month.
naira per month. And this is where gets really interesting. This is where like some of the grass to grain aspects comes into play. So like I said, I grew up in Badagry. The job was on the island, and so if I was to go from my parents' place to my place of
So
work, I would most likely have to wake up as early as 5 a.m. to get to the place of work by 8. And if I left my place of work by 5, I would be getting back to my parents' place like 11 o'clock
nine.
or also at night. And so I went to Lagos to my friend who wanted to build like the websites then, who was like one of the catalysts for me. So his parents had like a church or so in Lagos. And so I stayed with him. So oftentimes, because it was like the church quarters, there were people in church. They will have like events in church. There were people who have to stay there and all. And so I would have to like sleep within the church hall. Now the good thing is that the church had like mats, right? It's like a family church, so they had like a lot of mats and stuff. And it's like the wooden mats, the normal
Yeah.
bambooish local mats and stuff. So they had mats, they had like all these high chairs. And so for a couple of nights, right, I would be in a position where I would come back from work like 9 o'clock in the night. I just buy noodles on the road or just buy bread and akara on the road, and then just go to church, put like the white chairs into like a four cornered pillar, then
Yeah.
put like the mosquito nets around it, put the mat on the ground, use my school bag as my pillow, use one of my
Yeah.
shirts to just cover the school bag, and then just stay there. But again, I was still laser focused on that $500. So I'd come back from work by 10. I would still be up reading to like 1. Then before I would sleep, the next morning I'm up again like 5 o'clock to get to work and stuff. So that was like my life for like 3 months, but it wasn't good for me like health wise, right? That was like the I didn't really grow up experiencing that whole wake up in the
That kind
morning,
of
go through
discomfort.
Lagos stress and that kind of discomfort and stuff. And it was 70K. And so I told myself that, hey, I'd saved an amount of money. I had this guy who was like my mentor and stuff. What if I could quit my job, move out to Accra, that's like way more cheaper, and figure out if this guy who is mentoring me can probably pay me for any service I can offer him. So right, he had like a website or so, a WordPress website. Maybe he could pay me to maintain it. Literally just pay me anything, right? He earns like 8K a month. So even if it's just to pay me $50 or even or so for me
Mhm.
to just be able to like just eat and stuff. And so I mentioned it to him, and he was like, he doesn't have any reoccurring stuff to do, but the Slack group at the time needed to build like
The
a website.
manager.
Yes. And so he was going, he had like an old Mac that he just fixed. And so actually, no, he had not fixed it. So he had like an old Mac that he would fix for me and ship it to me in Nigeria. And he hopes that that would be like my catalyst to start my work and stuff. And then I was excited. Like I was really, at that time, every opportunity, and it's not a form of like I was in suffering, so every opportunity felt like some form of
A
path
leap.
to success and stuff. That was not even the case. It was just every opportunity was just interesting for me. Like I was happy about every opportunity. So I think, like I said, naivete really helped me a lot during that process. I wasn't thinking about living, surviving, blowing, renting a house or stuff like that. I was just fully focused on just learning. And so I did that. He sent me like a mark. He actually, for me to even build the website, he did like a 8 hours tutorial for me on Rails, right? So I had like some questions on Rails and stuff. I sent it to him. So he stayed, did some 8 hours tutorial on Rails. So it's weird. Like he's about to pay me for his service, but he's
It's
taking the
teaching
time
you.
to build the resource for me to do it and stuff. So he sent the mark to me, and that was the catalyst for me. That mark was the first mark I had. And with that mark, I earned enough money to get a mark for myself, a mark for a sibling, and I've had like the opportunity to buy like several Macs and several gadgets for people all the way then. So I got the laptop, I started learning React, I started checking on YouTube on how to like write a resume, reached out to him, he provided advisory for me. My first job was like some contracts on Upwork, freelancer.com, several people and stuff. I eventually worked with him, right? I was friends with him for like the first 3, 4 years of my career. So like into the third year, I worked with him like the whole third year. He had like a
Mm.
startup that he was working on, so I worked with him, and he paid me, right? He didn't have the whole I'm the one who mentored you. Without me, you wouldn't be here and stuff like that. He paid me for.
Mm.
He was actually the first person who paid me the $500 per month and stuff like that. So he paid me like $500 per month for like the first year, and I spent all that time in Accra. There's still details of the grass to green in Accra, because at some point when I went back to Accra, all this while when he sent me the laptop, I went back to Accra. I didn't have a place to stay, and so my wife, now that was my girlfriend there, had to reach out to one of our church friends who was on IT, and so he lent me like his place to stay. So I
Hostel.
was staying in his place, and from this hostel I would go to the school hall to work and stuff like that. But interesting, I really didn't care. I had friends at the time who were students, who were like my classmates and course reps then, and they insulted me. People mocked me. People did their stuff, and I
Mm.
and I understood where they were coming from. Right? Ideally speaking, what I did was stupid, but I was like in a bubble that just existed, and in that bubble, I was just grinding every day, reading and stuff. So I guess that's like that's how expansive I can be today. Yeah.
That's quite an interesting and a side I've actually not heard before. So thanks very much for sharing that. So if you looked in retrospect now, or in hindsight as they would say, with the understanding and wisdom you have now, would you have taken that decision to drop out of school and still pursue your dream the way you did?
So if there is an assurance that the paths would have been the same, like I would have met the people I met when I did, then yes, I would do it 10 out of 10 times.
I think that's quite something, and I know I'm almost certain a lot of people would not have the nerve to do that. I know I probably would have been disowned or not. I never know. I never took that decision. But thanks very much for sharing that experience. And this is actually to encourage someone who is actually thinking of, there's a lot of lessons to learn from what you shared. Being laser focused, being optimistic, and reaching out. They say a closed mind is a closed destiny. You not talking to
Yeah,
that mentor to say, "Hey, can you pay me to do this for you?" You will probably not have made your first $500 in the first 3 years of doing the hustle, and
yeah.
probably still be sleeping in church.
That would have been a completely different reality.
Yeah, so it's quite some lessons there. Are you tired of dealing with the hassle of recording podcasts or interviews? Say goodbye to technical headaches and hello to a seamless recording experience with Zencaster. Zencaster is the ultimate browser based solution for high quality podcasting and interviews. With its user friendly interface and robust features, recording a professional podcast has never been easier. With Zencaster, you can effortlessly record crystal clear audio and up to 4K video from participants, regardless of their location. Its automatic local audio and video recording ensures that you never lose a single word or moment from your podcast. Once you're done recording, use Zencaster's post production to export your podcast into various device platform compatible media files and distribute it all in one place to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all major podcast destinations. Say goodbye to Dencal edicts and hello to asshole free recording. Try Zencaster today and experience the future of podcast recording. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use my code ThisDevLife, that is ThisDevLife, and you'll get 30% off your first month of Zencaster's paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. I see, of course, I am, we are contacts on WhatsApp. So I see a lot of your posts mentioning intentionality, mentioning things like taking on any challenges, not being afraid to be seen in organizations, and being working towards visibility in your organization. And that was actually one of the reasons I've made a note to invite you on the show for almost 2 years now, to be honest. I think I probably would have mentioned it to you. I'm like, nah, this year we must do it. Now, working with international organizations now, uh how have you been able to scale, from being an entry level person with no CS background, with no degree at that time when you started, and how were you able to navigate the company politics, the people problem, and ensuring that the right people saw what you are doing and are able to support your journey? How were you able to do that in an international organization?
Okay, so I think my career for and similar to like most people in Nigeria starts with mostly like freelancing. So you work on the project, you stop working on the project, move to the next client and stuff. And so we're really not in situations where we have like some sense of ownership around the product. So we just build the product, ship the product to the organization or to the client, and we move on. And so it affects us in building sense of ownership. Our communication skills are usually limited to just giving updates, so mostly like project management, because usually the client gives you like a very detailed brief, and then you just work on the detailed brief. So like except from like the early conversations of discovery to figure out what the product or the project is going to be about, they're just updates in between the whole process and
Yeah,
stuff. And so that also affected like most of like my early jobs. Like so in retrospect, I was in situations where I would have like a contract with like a product company, and 6 months, 9 months, 8 months into it, I would start having like issues, and I'll probably lose the contract. And so until the job I had before community, I had to like ask myself, like, hey, what's happening? What's wrong and stuff. And I learned most of the skills at community, right? So like community is one of the places where I became more intentional about my people skills, more intentional about my skill as an employee in an organization, and not just my skill as a software engineer who can actually write code. Because I realized that it's not the technical issues. Like I ship code, I do my stuff well, and the like. So one of the first things I had to learn is the fact that communication is probably even more important than delivering work, right?
mhm,
And like we should always deliver work, but for the most part, like the whole process of communicating, informing stakeholders about what's happening, informing stakeholders about changes in the whole development process. When you're getting new insights, when you're having like difficulties trying to figure out stuff, the promptness or proactiveness to send updates, to inform people,
yeah,
to get like feedback from people and stuff is really very important, because in product companies things change, right? You did like early research about how to ship a feature, you felt it was going to take you like 3 days or so, and then in the process maybe a cluster, maybe something goes wrong, and while you should actually proactively try to fix that stuff and still ensure you can deliver, one of the first things I learned, and that was like one of my metrics that I use, because so for me my process is this: if I discover a fault in, or if I discover a place where I have some form of improvement, one of the things I do for myself is I develop like actual metrics I can use to track that I'm improving,
mm,
right? So I try and find like actual metrics. So like in, for instance, in communicating, one of the early metrics I had was that I would check the number of times my manager or stakeholders had to send me a message to get updates about a thing. I'd also check a number of times I missed a delivery, like maybe like a delivery date by either 1 day or 2 days, and my manager or a stakeholder or somebody on my team was unaware of it. Then I would also check a number of times people in other teams had to send me a message to figure out why I was working on their service. Because so in community we have like a microservice architecture, and so there are certain times where you have to make changes in a service. There are certain times where you have to like deploy something to test in staging, and no other person can deploy after you. So those were like my metrics, right? So I went back, checked on Slack, checked the number of times people sent me a message, kept like some arbitrary figures in certain ones I couldn't track. And I was like, okay, so for the next quarter, I need this to drop to like half. So like
Mm-hmm.
I always had like drastic expectations for myself, like initially and stuff. And so that was one of the ways I improved on communication. And then within communication itself, and this is where communication ties within visibility, and I will explain the concept of visibility and branding. So that within communication, we use Slack. And so I noticed that I was having conversations within DMs, right? So I would send a person a DM that, hey, I'm working on this and stuff. So I would find somebody on a team that I'm working on their service and
And
send either the
message them
manager
directly.
of the team and send them a DM and talk to them and stuff. But the problem was that that person might not see the message because we work asynchronously, people in different time zones and stuff. The person might not see a message. There might be somebody else on that team working on who needs to ship stuff, and they just notice that I'm doing something, and then they now come to a general Slack group and they're like, "Hey, Ayomide, why are you working on stuff? I need to ship stuff and stuff like that." And it feels bad because now I have to be reactive to the person's post. But in reality, I was proactive. I sent a message to somebody on the team, but I did that in a DM. And so one of the things I told myself was that except I was talking to my manager or I was talking to someone I was working on that were only the people working on a specific
Yeah.
project, I would make every communication happen in public groups. And so if I had to use something in a different team, I'd go to their channel, write a message in their channel and say, hey, I'm working on this and stuff. Then I created what I called my own development plan. So if I was working on stuff that affected multiple teams, what I would do is that I would find like a channel that had like key members of those teams in that channel. And then I would drop all my message there and I would use like a thread. So every day or every hour, whenever there were things that were changing and stuff, I would post an update there. So it was more like narrating the journey and the process. And I would even still go the extra mile of copying the link for individual groups and tell them that, hey, I'm tracking this in this place. Please follow through here. And so that helped with visibility because I was now in a position where people in different teams were seeing me working on stuff, right? So they were seeing me working on stuff, and I already had like visibility within my team. So for most people, there's already visibility within your team. You're doing stand up, you're working on stuff. A lesson I also learned is that my stand ups used to be short and abridged. My stand ups were very mechanical. I'm working on this, I'm working on this, I'm working on this, and that was all. But my colleagues were very narrative in their stand-up. So like if they were experiencing issues, if they discovered something, they would be very narrative in stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, maybe I'm the one just killing myself. So I became very narrative in stand-up, right? If I was working on something, if I experienced an issue, I would explain the context of what I saw. I would even mention a colleague paired with me on it, what we discovered and stuff like that. And so that also helped me build visibility and trust and confidence within my team because now my teammates are aware of what I'm doing, how I'm solving problems, and they can, to a very large extent, vet that, okay, my thought process or my shipping process or my development process actually makes sense and they can trust me, right? So, and that was how I built like in like I by improving my communication skills, I on the other hand had effect on my visibility. Another way for building visibility that I usually recommend to people is put yourself in a position where you're offering to help, especially if you're still like very early in your career. So, right, somebody is working on some stuff and you don't have anything doing. You could choose to go read something, or you could choose to just tag the person and say, "Hey, I know you're working on this. I would like to pair with you on this." And then don't do that in a private channel, right? Do it in a public channel where
In
the
public
person
channel.
posted it and stuff like that, so people can see it. Now I know it might sound like you're doing politics and stuff, but at the end of the day, we get promoted for the work people see us do. And
Yeah.
so you're doing the work. Just show people that you're doing the work, right? You don't have to wait until performance review where you write everything. And the people who are reviewing your performance review are like, when did he do this? Like when did this happen and
Yeah.
stuff like that? And so they can't track that, right? A good manager would be able to track it, would be able to defend you. but you should make the work easier for your manager by
Exactly.
positioning yourself in the places where you need to position yourself within the organizations and stuff. Then also, finally, there's still more points, but I think this should maybe bring it down to like a conclusive point. Engineers should run away from the habit of avoiding projects that require them to interact with stakeholders outside the engineering team, right?
Mm.
So yes, we try to solve some of the most technical problems. We are more interested in the technical problems, and I think it's different, right? So if you're an SRE, to a very large extent, you might not have so much visibility with the business team or people outside the
Yep.
engineering team. But even at that, right, if you're an SRE, you can find ways to say narratives around your incident response process and figure out how you can find like a communication point between that and the business. So, for instance, if there was like an incident that affected customers, you resolved it. You can write an article about it that would be posted on the company's
Yep.
engineering blog that talks about how you handled an incident. So externally, the article would probably not have all the details, but internally, when the article is read, people already have color.
Yeah, they have a
They already understand.
context.
They have the context and stuff, so they can already understand. And so that's how you keep showing the impact of your work on the business. So like we had an incident that would have affected like 10,000 customers, but because of this approach and this approach, this statistics, how I did this, how I did this, how I did this, we were able to like reduce the impact to like 1K customers and so. And that already shows like you saved the business technically a churn of like 10,000 customers and you reduced the margin of churn to like just 1,000 customers and stuff. And so the value of that is the value of whatever an average customer pays per month, right? And so you can
Mhm.
actually bring out factual financial value of the work you're doing. And so in your performance review, you can literally write it. So I do that, right? You reference the link and you just write, I potentially saved the business a loss margin of about $1 million or so based on this
And stuff like
incident
that.
that I led and stuff like that. And so when people read it, they understand because in the article they can see what you did and stuff like that, right? And so that's the case. So if you're in a role where you don't interact with business people, figure out a way to sell a narrative, figure out a way to find that story, to track your work as much as possible, as high as possible to like the
Mhm.
business and stuff like that, right? If you cannot get as far as like customers or so, but take it as far as you can and sell that narrative. If you're a product engineer like myself, where you do some infrastructure, but most times you mostly spend your time building products or features that customers use, go for the features that have like the highest risk sometimes, like occasionally figure
Mhm.
out the
That
features that
people
have
run
like
away
the
from.
highest risks and stuff like that, right? Work with the business guys because if the business team are talking about how your communication, how your work ethics and stuff like that are sound, those conversations happen. So see, most CEOs are not aware of product engineering conversations. Product engineering conversations most times end with the CTO or with your manager, but business guys have conversations in rooms where almost all the C-level guys are there, and they can have those conversations like, oh
Yep.
yeah, yeah. So we ship this when they're doing their reports. Most, at least in my company, that's how it's done. We mention like the engineer who worked on it, and so if you work on those kind of projects, the CEO and some of the C-suite guys tend to see your name more, and so it's easier for your manager to say, hey, we want to promote Ayomide because when you say you want to promote Ayomide,
They
every
know
other
why
person within the
Ayomide.
organization know who Ayomide is, right? Even if they don't know everything Ayomide is doing, but oh yeah, I know Ayomide. I've heard Ayomide's name and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a very extensive one. Thanks very much for sharing those insights. I would try to keep this the episodes under 1 hour, so I think we're sort of getting to that mark, and I think this sort of gives the wrap, and it's actually the main purpose of this episode today to actually talk about how we get visibility in our organizations to ensure either we get more pay or promotions, or at least
yeah,
we are able to. No, it's all about impact and value. Once you give that value, you definitely get the rewards that come along with it
yeah,
from time to
exactly.
time. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing those experiences. And to sort of wrap the episode up, so if you were to, and you sort of answered this previously, but to make it more concrete in wrapping up, if you were to advise your would I say your 20-year-old self starting in tech, starting in software engineering, what's that one advice you would give the 20-year-old Ayomide?
Don't try to start a startup.
And why is that?
Yeah, so I think for me, starting a company was one of the ways that launched me into mentorship because the first company I started, there were some like IT guys who had seen come to the table tennis hall and stuff, and I found that they had like some computer science knowledge, programming knowledge, and stuff. And so I hired them to do their IT with me to build like my first startup project. It was my first foray into like mentorship, and I saw their progress, I saw their growth. Many of them are doing like extensively well now, and so, in a way, right, it had like its positive impacts in terms of like mentorship. It also expanded my ability and my knowledge of working with products and my product thinking because I was in a place where I was like the engineering lead with limited experience. I had to like do product research. I had to know what the product customers were thinking and stuff. And that has impacted me to this point. Then also there's the resilience that comes with seeing all your salary for like the first 4 years of your life being spent on paying employees and on marketing and on trying to build your company and stuff, right? So there was like not having savings, but then the personal resilience that comes from that. However, if I was to give myself an advice, it would be to not do a startup. It would be to figure out a different way to mentor people and spend most of my time figuring out how to build like my technical skill and depth. So right, for me, I don't feel that I have the level of technical skill and depth I would have had if I didn't build a startup. But again, my life is no regret. So this is just if I could go back in time and say, hey, don't
Change
start
that.
that company. Forget about it. Mentor these guys, but forget about this company, right? Maybe register your company as an IT training institution, get them on IT and train them, but just do that and train people, but don't build a startup. Don't spend your money on marketing. Don't spend your money on meeting customers or growing on customers and stuff, right? But all in all, it's been a good learning experience for
Hmm.
me, right? I feel that it added to like the mix of the knowledge I have. It added to like my
Yeah, definitely.
perspective and has given me a more holistic perspective. So, but still, yet, still, if I had to go back, that would be what I would say to my 20-year-old self.
Yeah, thanks
Then
very,
I
very
think
much.
the other thing
Yeah.
would be don't listen to people, right?
Mm,
Um, yeah, advice, yeah, what people are saying and stuff, but maybe not don't listen to people, but don't listen to people without filtering what you're saying. In
mm,
reality, when we look at the world, like when I see the world and I see the way people move from trends, fashion trends change. Today, you're mocking people because of their current style. Then the next 3 years, because some celebrities picked up that style, you switch, it becomes like the holy grail and stuff like that. I've just found out that people to a very large extent, even myself to an extent, outsource our thinking resources to people. So we outsource our thinking process and we allow people to decide what we want to do
mm.
with our life. I'm a tech bro. For some weird reason, I don't know why. I prefer to wear joggers, this, and sneakers. I've actually not started down. So like recently, I took up like a responsibility in church, and it's made me start wearing corporate wears, and I look good. Like I look very good in
You look
corporate
dope.
wears. And I've been asking myself why, like, why don't I wear this often? And now I'm like, no, I'm going to start wearing this as often as possible, right? I'm going to start wearing a shirt tucked in into a trouser and stuff. So generally, people outsource their knowledge or their thinking process to people. And so, if you're getting advice from people, it's important for you to be able to filter it and figure out what you're saying, which part of what you're saying is just based on the generally acceptable knowledge, and what is actually based on their own critical thought process and stuff because that was one of the things that helped me, right? I was very stubborn, very opinionated. And for the decision I'd already made when I left school, I needed to be that. If I had become a person who I have people who dropped out from school and they got swayed by people. People would advise them to do this, do this. And so they did a lot of stuff. And right now they have not found their balance. But I was just focused
Mm.
on one thing and I just stayed with it. Thankfully for me, survivorship biased, it's worked with God's grace and with my community and my tribe around me, it worked and stuff. So that would be another thing I would tell myself. I would remind myself that, hey, stay on this. Maybe I even did, and maybe that's why I am like this. I don't know. Maybe like in the future, there's a time machine. I went back, told myself in some weird cryptic way. I don't know.
We'll invent that machine. We'll invent that startup.
Yeah, not me and you, just you, probably.
All right. Thanks very, very much for sharing your experience, your journey, and your advice with our listeners today. It's very much appreciated. And I know our listeners would actually love it also, especially those who are just thinking of starting their careers in tech or are just starting up. Even those who are a little bit experienced also would find something to pick out of this. People who are looking to get promotions in their current place of work, people are looking on how to build visibility with their current employers or even external people and customers. It will go a long way in helping them. So thanks very much for coming on. And yeah, pretty much that's a wrap for today's episode of This Dev Life. Remember, it's the show where we talk about developer lives, challenges we face every day, and how we overcome these challenges. Until we come your way again with yet another episode of This Dev Life, stay safe and goodbye.
Bye.